Yes, indeed, we are live. We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you now warm and massive greetings. Of course, today I will not be specifically speaking to the Sierra Leonean audience because it's an issue bordered on geopolitics, and geopolitics is international. So this is a bigger game, the bigger scheme of things. So I will be speaking in the Queens. Or suffice me to say that despite speaking in the Queens, that I may likely go into our local parlance when and if necessary. But the bulk of the conversation will be in the Queen's language. And it's such an irony, but we'll get to that. But once again, ladies and gentlemen, we are live. This is the TNN TV media empire. Today is a longer show. I had a break-in just now, but I'm sure it was still being recorded, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But what I was saying is, I normally say it's a short show, but I believe that this is going to be a short one because I've got other things to do. Just to inform you quickly, the publicity secretary of the All People's Congress, Mr. Sidi Yaya Tunis, will be on the platform this week, I believe this weekend. So keep watch because there are so many things to discuss. And what's the exact position of the All People's Congress? Are they going to remain resolute, hold their position, or are there compromises, or are there going to be compromises? This will be coming up this weekend. For now, we want to talk about geopolitics, the shifting of geopolitics, or geopolitics shifting. Right. And within the geopolitics shifting context is this renaissance, I want to call it, the renaissance in the Sahel. The Sahel is a piece of region within West Africa, running all the way down from the west coast of Africa, Burkina Faso, from the tip of Ghana, all the way up to the Algerian border. So countries that are in the limelight lately are Burkina Faso, the Republic of Mali, and the Republic of Niger. Niger is the latest one in this falling domino of former French colonies. Former French colonies, if we use the word former. And I try for use and loosely because to some degree, we may look at the usage of the word colony from a different perspective to represent other than what it is being used for. I hope I'm clear on that. Having said this, there have been a spate of coups. That's the usurping of constitutional government. Constitutional government, one agreed through the principles and practice of democracy. Another critical word, which is a good one, but the way it is interpreted and applied in cases of some countries or in a particular region, it has a completely different connotation. I'm talking about the word itself, the translation or the applicability, theory and practice. But anyway, to move forward, these three countries, I was saying that there have been a spate of coups in the West African region. And this has worried a lot of people. But behind these coups, what we are beginning to see is a sentiment which is being expressed by citizens of these countries, which are anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, anti-neocolonialist. So we will understand that these colonies were colonies of the West, i.e., the French, the British, the Portuguese, and the Spaniards. There were other colonial masters, but the key dominant ones, especially during the period and the now that we want to talk about, are these four. But we will be specific today while these four will be discussed. But the main imperialist power will be France, whose interest is now being affected and affected very, very seriously. Now, people, we first of all need to understand the idea behind a free people. If you are somebody who believes in the creation of this earth and human beings, okay, that we are God's creation, which means that we are all supposed to be free. And we are all supposed to be entitled what God Almighty gave to us wherever we found ourselves. Geographically speaking, the benefit of ourselves should play definitely to the advantage of the occupants, the inhabitants, and not others. Even if others were to benefit, it should be within a framework of understanding in which both sides will benefit. Not even equally, because those that have it should be the greatest of the benefactors, and those that don't could benefit, but on the basis of arrangement, but fair arrangements. But what we've seen throughout time is arrangements that were made from a one-sided position, from a position of the greater and the least. So the greater has always got this huge advantage, if we may say, in terms of negotiated settlements on whatever, be it trade, be it land, be it whatever. It's always one side that is profiting. And this has been going on for centuries. And it's been a game plan. And every time the game plan is honed, the skills are honed, the strategies are honed, polished, recalibrated to suit the time. Because people do wake up from slumber. So you have to find another way. If you are responsible for their slumber, you have to find another way to put them back to bed, making them half conscious. Continue to put out rhetoric, propaganda that will actually twist their compos mentis. I mean, people don't have, especially people who don't have strong minds of their own. This is what I was trying to say about compos mentis. Because you actually need to have a strong mind to understand these things. Other than that, you have people who have bought into the narrative as if one side is for the greater good and the other side, which they actually belong to, is not of no good and should actually depend on the other for their well-being, for their welfare, and etc. These I find quite incredible, ridiculous, unacceptable. And that is why earlier on I mentioned the issue about those that believe in creation, in God. If you do believe in that God created man, and man definitely was created equally, and wherever man find themselves, whatever is of that place where they find themselves is theirs. It's theirs for the taking. But it has not been the case for centuries. Another group of people who have placed themselves on a pedestal so high, which makes us look like we are down so low, and what God bestowed us with. Remember, when God created us, He gave us dominion over all things of this earth. That's why I said, if you found yourself somewhere by accident of birth or whatever, but you found yourself somewhere as a citizen of that place, then whatever is of the earth is yours. That's why God gave us dominion over all things all things in places where you find yourselves. But man has become so greedy, or man became so greedy, that they continue to rape the earth. Rape the earth. And that's having an adverse effect. But back to the shifting times of geopolitics, one group of people decided to enslave another group of people. When they were done using them, use them. I mean, you can't even treat animals as such. People need, sometimes we say, we don't want to mention this. Even the people that did these acts, they talk about their history. Roman times. So the history goes back and back and back centuries. And it's well documented. But whenever we talk about our history, it is a problem. See, you've been retrogressive, recidivism. You're going back to the ages. Well, we don't intend talking about it. It's the circumstances that we find ourselves which makes us to continue to talk about it. But anyway, after that period of enslavement, after we had been used properly and thoroughly to develop the other side of these other people, apparently we were told that we were free. You see, the disconnect and the social engineering that's been done to us has left us more traumatized than the damage that was done to us, our forefathers, who bore the brunt of slavery. And that damage, which is happening now, I mean, which basically has left us confused. It's why we continue to argue amongst ourselves instead of having a one agenda. There are people who think that we should continue to be subjected to subjugation. And imagine we are supposed to be a free people with self-determination. Even if it's not by God's decree, it is decreed in international law that every people are entitled to self-determination, their own destiny, not dictated by someone else. But back to the subject matter, I was just trying to give a context, a background. Back to the subject matter. After slavery, it's been scheme after scheme, came colonialism. After slavery came colonialism. After colonialism, we are observing what Kwame Nkrumah called. He warned us at the time because it was not too obvious, but he was brilliant, foresighted enough to see what will be coming in the next decades. These are visionary leaders. They see way ahead and prepare. He warned us about neocolonialism. It's the change of tactic to continue to subjugate us so that we conform with others whose intent is only to reap us, but they appear as if they are being benign, that their actions are benign, benevolent. And we hear all of these terminologies, and there are even few actions on the ground where we belong, where they will help us to fix tap with running water. I mean, imagine if you go back to our history, you will see that we had oases. I'm not saying that we were this advanced, but I'm saying that we had oases. And again, if our development, if our self of being had not been disturbed, what do I mean by this? If the advent of slavery had not taken place and we were together, you know, when man together, they think, but you keep disrupting them by taking away not the sick, not the lame. For over 150 years, man away from a certain dominion, from people or atmosphere where they belong, where they could have developed. And these that you are taking away are the ones with brains, are the ones, you know, here who are thinkers, who are philosophers, who are gifted, who's got, these are the kind of people that they took away. And they left us the sick, the lame. And then they pointed at us later and said, look at these lazy people. After you've taken away the best, the warriors, the philosophers, the thinkers, the craftsmen, artisanal geniuses. I mean, all these people with this different trade. I mean, I'm just mentioning this. I am not trading blame. But it's necessary to mention this because people need to understand this context. And when we came over, when our forebearers were brought over, they worked the fields. They developed these places. And when, remember, this was times of not machinery, but it was largely dependent on the sheer willpower, muscle, strength of human beings. Human beings to tote stones, to move dirt, soil in industrial fashion. You can imagine, to dig wells, to bore holes, and sacrifices were made for some of these inventions, like the canals, like the dams that washed away thousands and thousands of people. And with the point I'm trying to make, once the West became industrialized, I mean, you had this revolution, the invention of the wheel, they call it. The invention of the wheel is not new, but they call it, they invented the wheel. And the wheel was some kind of sheer magic. I mean, when it spins, whatever spins, does these incredible things. In machinery, you name it, whether it's fans, turbojets, washing machines, irrigation, engines, so forth and so on. But then you had the Industrial Revolution, and then they created machines that could begin to do the work which human beings previously were doing. So gradually, they began to find the practice of slavery inhumane. But even after parliaments in Europe passed law that slavery is outlawed, it continued for another 150 years because this made countries filthy rich, including the Catholic Church, because people went out in the name of the Queen, in the name of Catholicism. The Catholics actually financed these slavery projects. That's why you have to be careful with religion. And they used the same religion to pacify us. These were all part of the tools that they used to entrap us, to capture us. Anyway, after the advent of slavery, because there was barely any use for us, they released us. Imagine we've been with our masters for hundreds of years, and they were responsible for us. Mind you, we were tilling the soil day and night, 24/7, without pay. But everything else, they were responsible. Of course, you have to keep the means of production going. So you have to look after their health, you have to clothe them, you have to feed them, but under inhumane circumstances. So once that was done, they now moved over to freeing us, and then we had nowhere to go. We couldn't do anything because we other than being slaves, we were not part of the society in any shape, sense, or form. You found people who were free. They don't have homes to go to. They don't have monies to start. They don't have medical, hospital, clothes, because everything was being done for them whilst they were subjugated to that time. Anyway, we move on to colonization. And then they began to colonize. You see, there are two aspects. I know people do confuse this. Like when they talk about reparation, you got reparation that is being requested for in the diaspora because of slavery. And you got the reparation which is being asked for or demanded by the continent itself. I'm talking about Africa because of the rape and plunder. There are two different aspects. However, it then moved on to colonization, in which the same powers that once held slaves went into active colonization, colonized other countries. I mean, they basically had these countries, but this is just another scheme. It moved on to colonization, in which at times they were physically there, But at other times, it became through indirect rule. This is the period between colonization and neo-colonization. So they went to war twice: the Great War of the First World War, which was basically about land, human beings, minerals, and then the Second World War, which was about the same thing: greed for land, minerals. That was about us. Actually went to war to fight over us, over land. Remember Sykes and Picot, the French and the Englishman, sat down in the parliament thousands of miles away, and drew imaginary lines, carved out the continent. If you remember the Berlin Conference in the 1800s, 1880, I believe, they carved out Africa, forgetting to know tribal lines, relations, chieftaincy. All these things, because we had a system, by the way. They just ran through them, far away, detached away from the place, and made it their own. We became vassal states. It is out of this the French colonized largely these places in West Africa that we are talking about, that I want to talk about briefly, i.e. Algeria. Algeria is in the north, of course, and they've got a bad history with the French. The French actually killed them, murdered them, babies, flew sorties, bombed them, just to keep these people subjugated. The Algerians resisted. I think this was under General de Gaulle. But in the end, these countries prevailed. Because again, after World War II, the empires became weak. Britain, who had one of the most powerful empires in modern times, by the turn of the century in the 1900s, was already a weakened empire. But this is how empires are, just like how the United States is today. The height of the power of the United States is reducing, but most of us will not admit it, either through ignorance or just sheer will that this is impossible, that it wouldn't happen. Forgetting to know that empires have come and gone. The great Roman Empire, the empire of all empires, because they actually damaged themselves. And this is what is happening. You need to look back at history at the height of the United States power, which became obvious after 1945, after the Second World War. They became predominantly the power of all powers, because they fought on the side of the Allies and defeated Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler. And what emerged from there, the United States, was to set up almost everything that emerged from there. I'm talking about institution-wise. And this is how Europe itself became a vassal, a continent of the United States. The security of Europe depends on the United States. And this is how the dollar became the universal currency. Prior to that, of course, it was the pound sterling and so forth and so on. So from between them, 1945 to now, you had institutions such as the Bretton Woods, the IMF, the World Bank. These are all American institutions alongside the West, but the West were badly wounded. They were damaged. They fought themselves. Imagine when people fight themselves. They had then to go look for cheap labor abroad, which ended up bringing people from the Caribbean of Black heritage back into Britain, promised all sorts of things. If you remember the late Enoch Powell, I think he was the Minister of Interior in this country, talking about, the rivers of blood speech. People need to relate, to that speech and try to understand the context of it, how it's related or got connection with us. So we helped to build the empire, those that hurt us, to tell you how open we were. Again, how we were open to being used. So the French colonized these parts of Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali, the Ivory Coast, Niger, and all this Francophone, and that's how they divided it. Imagine other people's places, other human beings, other God's creation, Francophone and Anglophone. And they had two different policies. One was a policy of assimilation, and the other one was a policy of, I think, indirect rule. They had all the terminologies. They took us, as properties. This was the thing for quite a long time. as properties. They built institutions, and those institutions were meant to shape our ability and our sense of being into their own making, so that we are properly subjugated in a benign way. So we are soft. We don't resist like the African, emotional. They quietly, skillfully did this to us. Brought churches, brought missionaries, built schools. For years, people like us, as by virtue of my age, I was learning how to draw butterfly and naming the parts. I was learning how to draw flower, hibiscus flower, I'll never forget, because I used to like that. And naming the parts, the pollen, the grain, the petals, the stem, you name it, the tooth. And learning was better than silver and gold, all those kind of stuff. But in the meantime, they were pillaging the country, all the diamond and gold were going. And then you had the invention of the train, or they brought about the train. And it appeared as if the train was in our interest. Yes, we used the train, but the primary idea behind the train was to cut away wealth in massive or industrial scale. That's what the train was about. Go deep in the countryside, loot all these, whether it's agricultural produce or mining or minerals or what have you. That was it. And up to this day, we see, historical aspects of those times. So now, whilst some of our countries don't have the train to run on a commercial basis or passenger basis, but they've got special lines constructed from mining centers with hundreds and hundreds of coaches, in which the earth that belongs to the country is scattered away in carts or coaches from the mining place straight to a prepared dock, to a waiting ship, and carted off. And only those people who are taking it and the elite will enjoy the benefit, with the crumbs falling down to the people. And this is where we were used again and made to believe, because we've made these arguments many a times, that it is our leadership which is responsible for all of this. Our leadership is corrupt. Yes, they are corrupt, but we outsource our government, or how we should be governed, to others, who then shape who the leaders are going to be through a process called democracy. So these people who are supposed to be the moral guarantors, they actually facilitate the election of these governors or presidents who are placed there to do their bidding. So you understand, in that process, you can't call it democratic, because it's been engineered. And it's engineered to benefit another, whilst they are bribing that person and they are not talking, because the intent is to get what they want. I mean, some people can say you can't blame them because it is their interest. It is true, they are acting in place of their interest, but then they are misbehaving at the same time, because they are giving us the impression as if they are benign, as if what they are doing is in the interest of democracy and it's fair play, by the people, for the people, with the people. And I give you guys example to back up my point. Every leader that has come there, who has stood up to them, and standing up to them means that you are standing in reality with your people, those leaders were assassinated, murdered. I've named them before. I might name them again, but they've all been killed. Those leaders who have actually stood up and say, well, no, this deal is not fair, this agreement. We need to revoke this and sign a new agreement which will be of benefit to the country, and as a consequence, the people will benefit. But no, they're not interested in that. And this goes back to the heart of the matter in terms of uranium. Uranium, as I understand it, I was doing a little bit of research, didn't finish it before coming to this program, had some other things to do. But the French were buying uranium from Niger, which is at the heart of this matter, for peanuts. And this is actually not the cost for uranium on the market. But of course, you can find a deal in which you can get special dispensation. I mean, these things happen. But the idea that you're getting it for peanuts compared to the market value, the market price, means that you are complicit in the rape of the country. And this is why you've got a leadership there which is subservient to you, which is doing your bidding. And for so doing, it's almost like mafia-like. So you protect that presidency. Hence why we are hearing restoring democracy. Bazoum, that's the president of Niger, should be restored. Because why? He was giving you uranium at a cutthroat price, in which the people of Niger were enjoying almost zero, zilt. How long on this? So the people have begun to realize this. And before Benin was Mali. Before Mali was Burkina Faso. The anti-French sentiment is so strong that the people of Mali banned the French language, which was the official language. Now we need to understand this is the way how they turn us to be them in a different shape or form. But it's only about being subservient. You know, we listen to them because we look up to them. Imagine you worshiping a white Jesus. You are black like tar, like myself, but you're worshiping a white Jesus with blue eye. How can that be? These are all the manipulations. I remember when we were smaller, watching motion pictures. We didn't understand then. We were only looking at the action. But all these were cultural moves initiating the psychological reverse of our mindset, putting it into their own realm. That there's great things that are happening. I mean, you can look on the wall and you will see movement of people. But away from that, the theme of the movie will be the good and the bad. The good is always them. The bad is always us. To a point where you begin to regret why you were born this color. And this has happened many a times. There have been experiments conducted in the United States in which beautiful black babies, imagine babies, they gave them the white doll and the black doll. The children choose the white doll over the black doll that looks like them. Imagine this. Why? Because they've got the impression, or they've been given the impression, that they are ugly. Black is ugly, white is beautiful. They hate the hair, and this is what God gave you. This is what you were born with at birth. They hate their nose, and you can't have a different nose. And then you have to live in a skin uncomfortable for the rest of your life because you've been social engineered to believe that you are less. What kind of a relationship is this? What kind of a relationship is this? And then in the Bible, it tells you that, I've forgotten the verse in the chapter, in the book, slave, you should be subservient to your masters. And who are the masters? Them people. Who are the slaves? We people. Can you imagine inside the Bible? So God created masters and slaves, but yet the same people say civilization started from Africa. So in other words, the first place for human beings to set foot was in Africa, which is black, and that's where everybody else comes from. That's what we are told in the books. It's after they move into different hemisphere because of weather and environmental conditions, people began to change. You know, they began to evolve into something else, color, hair, texture of hair, and things like that. Because back in the continent, because of the weather conditions, you know, the sun and what have you, so we are tanned, we are dark, or we get a chemical in us that's called melanin, which is responsible for color. If you don't have melanin, you don't have color. Again, this is all BS, because white is a color, isn't it? But anyway, this is what has been going on for quite a long period of time. The relationship has been exploitative, very, very exploitative. And mind you, like in Niger, we are hearing about uranium. It's not only uranium. It's only now that some of us are beginning to understand that Niger has got oil. They've got gold. They've got diamond. You see, the continent is so blessed. And these people, the imperialists, the colonialists, they know this because they've got sophisticated machinery and they need these things. They are not blessed with them. So they have to extract it from elsewhere. But instead of making arrangements in which we have deals which is fair enough that we will benefit, this turns out not to be the case. It's an exploitative one. Came first, put chains on you. Secondly, colonize you. And, messed up your brain so much so the condition that they put you in, they also condition that condition. Imagine the levels of condition. When do you get deconditioned? This is where some of us find ourselves. That we continue to support them despite all this nonsense, simply because we live with them. We are so gratified that they gave us the opportunity to come to them. And now we cannot, of course, we should show some degree of gratitude, But imagine, people also need to understand the reason why you wouldn't find Black people in places like Eastern Europe, and why the attitude of Eastern Europeans are different to Black people than Western Europe is because the Eastern Europeans never took an inch of a Black soil. They never enslaved Black people. They never had these kind of encounters in which we know each other probably as masters and slaves. No, this is not the case. But in the case of the West, this is what it is. They went there. Remember Jomo Kenyatta, the founding father of Kenya? He put it succinctly when he said, when the missionaries came, imagine, listen to this. When the missionaries came, they came with the Bible in one hand and the dagger in the other. But they put the Bible forward first. In other words, that's what they were selling in the first place. But the dagger was always behind. So if they sell the Bible to you and you refuse to buy the Bible, then the dagger will come out in place of the Bible. Because why? They wanted to colonize us. They wanted to subjugate us. They wanted our land. They knew what was there. When they came, we offered them, you can eat. Anywhere you turn, you just see fruits growing on trees. It wasn't growing in Europe because it was ice. These are all facts. But it's not like we just gave up these places to them. We actually fought. There were people who resisted, like the country where I come from. We've got heroes like Baibure. Baibure, he resisted. I mean, people came from somewhere else and started to propose taxing them on their own land. I mean, they found this so abhorrent, so disgusting, that on their own land, somebody come from elsewhere and will charge them some tax that they should pay them. Pay them who came, that they resisted. They seriously resisted and they fought. But as usual, as much as they fought, you will imagine you will always have people within, collaborators, agent provocateurs, always within, who will sell their fellow countrymen for a piece of shilling. You will always. And this was the case. And in many other instances. The Asante in Ghana, Ghana had this kingdom, the Gold Coast. They resisted when these people turn up. I mean, they came down river because that's the first place where they can come from. And they come as some holiness. And we are welcoming. That's it. But when somebody's come with a different intention, they are one step ahead of you because we are just open. And by the time you realize it, they're already in your home and you can barely defend yourself. So the French has been carrying out this exploit. Not only the French, we're just focusing on the French, but all of them, the colonialists, the imperialists. And the idea about imperialism is to subjugate others to be under your control so that they can dictate to you or social engineer the way you should think, you should dress, and your culture and what have you. It does not have to be that way. Other people have their culture. You see, we accept it. Other countries have not. Afghanistan was an experiment for over 20 years. The United States spend how many trillions of dollars just to social engineer those people. And the people resisted. Because why? You have to have self-worth. You have to. I mean, you can take things from people who don't look like you, but which you consider to be good and productive and progressive, and imbibe that into your own system, but to have somebody else subjugate you after rape, plunder, and loot, and try to tell you that they are better off, that you have to follow their way. Not everybody will accept that, and we've seen that. Afghanistan is known as the graveyard for empires, because for centuries they've been trying to invade that place. Napoleon, going back to the 1700s, tried it twice. The British tried it twice. On all occasions, they were defeated. The Russians went in there. The Russians were defeated. And then the Americans thought that they were better. For 20 years, they had to run from there. And this is the most powerful country on earth. With all of the latest technology, they could not pacify a people who were considered to be illiterate and backward. And this is the thing, because the resilience of such people, that we will not accept it, that we pride ourselves, that we have self-worth. This is the guiding principle. Not like people like us who are ready to split at a moment's notice to support the other side, even though we are suffering. Yes, we come, they give us houses, they give us cars, but why shouldn't you be critical? Or is that bribery? That's what you're trying to say. So all we ask for, we're not asking for bloodletting. We're not asking for a pound of flesh. We're just asking, let's move on, live and let's live. Stop this imbalanced relationship. That's what we're saying. So Niger has gold, diamond, oil, and uranium. Uranium, the importance of uranium cannot be underplayed, equally with oil. Do you know that they were building a pipeline that was running from Niger, that was going through Algeria into Europe? Did you know this? So you see, some of these projects are shrouded in secrecy. Because why? The leadership that these colonial masters put there, through a process that they call democracy, because the people have been made to understand that this is the process. Stand in line, fill in a piece of paper or marble and drop it and vote for this person. And then they manage to get hold of that person, because most likely these people are compromised anyway. There must be some secret about them that they hold. But most of the time, these are all henchmen that the imperialist powers will put there to serve their interests. And this is no different with Bazoum. The United States has $100 million drone base in Niger, a very poor country. And if you check the human index rate, they are at the very bottom. But yet still, they've got, the United States have got $100 million drone base. 100 million, 100 million. This is not child's play. And they've got 4 other bases, foreign bases, in this one single country, in the name of fighting terror. Imagine how sophisticated these people are. They can go in the air. They got satellites in the air that can see, not only see, but can hear. They can watch formations of people, movement of people. But yet still, for many, many years, the war continued to persist. ISIS is growing. Where are they getting the logistics from? Where? Like I said in the last broadcast, it is becoming clear that some of the imperialist powers were in cahoot with these rebel movements. In fact, they were facilitating the war just to keep the agreements that they have with these countries, live and well, because in so doing, they will ensure that their loot continues to go unhindered. Unhindered. Burkina Faso, Mali scrapped over 5 military deals with the French. Military agreements, because countries can have these bilateral agreements of military treaties, security treaties to help protect them, because they can't protect themselves. So you create or facilitate the process, then you are called. In other words, you set fire to the building, you are the arsonist, and then you run, and then you put on a fireman's gear, and then you are called to come put out the fire that you set in the first place. This is the game that they've been playing on us, hoodwinking us. Yeah? Now, What they're telling us now in Niger is to restore peace. Let me just go straight into this issue. Let me forget all this background I've created, which I think is enough. They're talking about restoring democracy. Which democracy? So what about these people that have jumped on the streets demonstrating in favor of the coup? Mind you, I don't support coup, but I've got conditions. And these conditions are, if political coups, institutional coups, are said by George Weah, are not addressed in the first place, which is a preamble to coup plots, then I think I will support a coup. And I repeat, for clarity, institutional coups is real. This is not conjecture, neither is it, how would you call it, propaganda, but it is real. It is a fact. When elections are manipulated to favor a particular outcome, not of the people desire, that's institutional manipulation. When institutions are hijacked or weaponized because an incumbent wants to reign supreme in power and manipulates those institutions to work in his or her interest, these are all termed as institutional coups. And if these issues are not addressed, we are going to continue to see coups back in the continent. Since the 1960s, there have been over 115 or 120 coups. 99% of them, I would say, I'm exaggerating the figure, but a significant percent, and I would put 80% of it, was by the French people. The French establishment, not the people. Let's take the people away from the establishment, from the status quo, from the governors. They instituted those coups because those coups, those people that they supported a coup against, in some cases, they actually sent mercenaries. We will also have to look at the role of the French Foreign Legion. We'll also have to understand mercenaries. They were very prevalent in the 1960s and 70s, actually sent them to overthrow governments. These were mercenaries. People paid money to carry out these acts. These people have been doing this for like decades. So now the people have had enough, so they are canceling these things and they are actually beginning to see with their own eyes. If you have been here this long and you haven't solved the problem, which means that you are part of the problem. So what you do now, you need to leave because you've not been helpful. Leave us to solve our problems. And here comes the shifting of geopolitics. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, this would barely have happened. Because why? The West were on top of their game. We had a unipolar world, a single unit. Yes, it's a combination of countries, but all with the same attitude, ideology, philosophy. It's West, West, West. They do have their differences between them, but when it comes to others, they close rank. Because why? These are the same people. These are Caucasians. Regardless of you hear about Americans on the other side, remember, America or white Americans are Europeans. These people came from Europe. Apart from the indigenous people of the Americas, everybody else went there. Some went on top of the ship, which were the Caucasians, the Europeans, while others like us went beneath the ship as slaves. That's the difference. But whatever, they always close rank. So this was a unipolar moment. That's when you see the United States going from country to country because they were untouchable, unstoppable, bashing countries. They damaged Iraq. Look at Iraq today. Libya, they took the same thing to Syria. But this is where the game geopolitics began to shift. Because in Syria, the Russians made it known that this is one of their red lines. They had two red lines. One was Ukraine, where the battle is raging today. The other was Syria. But the United States defeated the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, in an ideological war back in the 1980s. Communism and capitalism. Remember, the United States prevailed. They crashed the Russian economy, which was weak, very weak. It was the ruble then. So the empire came tumbling down, and Gorbachev sold out the rest of America to the United States, which made people like Putin haven't forgiven him even at his death or deathbed. No. So the level of arrogance just increased. And when they decided to go into Syria, the United States, Russia said no, because Russia, the only base that they've got outside of their sphere of influence is in Syria, which the guy who is in Syria today as president, Bashar Assad, his dad, Hafez Assad, known as the Lion, struck a deal with the Russians then. That's back in the 60s, 70s. And that's how they got this cold, freshwater base in a very toxic, volatile, but strategic region. And the United States, as usual, was taking trouble there to go usurp power in that place. The Russians said no. By then, the Russians have begun to develop their capabilities, and we need to separate USSR from Russia. Russia is not an empire. It's not. The USSR was. Russia, they've been accusing them, and this is deliberate, and some of us are swallowing the bait, that Putin wants to recreate USSR. Where's the means? Where is the means? Well, because the United States say so, some of us are repeating the same argument without checking facts. Anyway, in Syria, Russia said, enough is enough. We are not going to tolerate this. Remember, they were actually going to bomb there. The reason why you saw the British Parliament said no, because they then took it now to the House of Commons and said no, is because the Russians said this is a red line. You know, power can only succumb to another power. And this was it. Even though people think that Russia is weak, that the Americans can walk over Russia, this is not the case. At all not. At all not. The Russians fired to announce their presence back in world affairs and to show that geopolitics is shifting or has shifted, and to announce a statement of intent. The Russian fired a missile. That missile from the Mediterranean Sea, it crossed over 7 countries and went and hit its target. That was their announcement that no, won't have this. And from that point on, they started bringing their asset into Syria. They already had a base there at Tarsus, I think they call the place. They started bringing their assets there. Their modern 4th and 5th generation aircraft. State of the art, not the F-35. They've got capabilities of their own. And they actually persecuted the war and saved the president. Other than that, same fate that meted Colonel Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, that's exactly what they were going to do to this guy, a trained doctor, eye doctor in the United Kingdom, who's been here at Buckingham Palace. A red carpet was spread out for him. But just because he started standing against policies of the West and started, criticizing Israel, he became a target. And the Russians saved him. And today, as we speak, he is the president. The difference here is the Russians were invited by the authorities in Syria, whereas the United States, the United Kingdom, or NATO were not. NATO is an aggressive force. It's not a force for peace. It's aggressive. What is it doing in the Middle East? What is it doing in the backyard in the East Europe? What is it doing there? But anyway, that's how the Russians announced their presence. So we're now seeing this geopolitical shift since the announcement of the Russians that they are back and they have formed an alliance with the Chinese. And mind you, it's the West that forced the Russia against their own will, because the Russians have always wanted to be a part of the West. Always. Unfortunately, this was not to be, because the strategy employed by the West alienated the Russians. The Russians wanted to join NATO. They said, but we don't have Warsaw Pact anymore. We don't know what NATO is about now, but we can still join NATO and be one. We can still join G7. And they actually entertained them in G7. G7 became G8. G7 is the group of well-industrialized nations. And Russia is industrialized. But the Americans has this arrogance. I'm talking about the leadership. The Russians are nothing over, rah, 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 and this and that and what have you. It's only John McCain used to call it a gas station acting as a nation. A nation. Anyway, they're talking about restoring democracy, and it's like, which democracy? And I talk about looking at the Human Development Index of Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali. They are the very bottom of the list. Yet these countries have all this mineral that's been sought by the West. All this mineral. And mind you, the EU is also in Niger. Of course, France is part of Niger, but the reason why it's at the top of the ladder because it's the colonial master and the preeminent one, which is in that region, in Niger. But the EU, made up of 26 countries, is also there. So if the EU is there, you would say 26 other countries, or 25 minus France, are there. They are there. Imagine in a country as poor as Niger, in terms of physicality, to see the physical richness, but the ground is fertile, it's rich. And this is what is their curse. But these people have no intent to be very generous with us. So the countries are at this very bottom for the last 60 plus so years, and they call it independence. Can you imagine? Independence. What independence is that? We need to relook at the word independence. And I'm asking anyone, all of you, to look at independence within the context of what we're talking about. Independent African countries. How can you be independent when you have somebody else dictating to you? And what they've made us to understand is 1 minute, please. Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I was just picking up a quick message. Okay, so we need to look at what independence is. Yeah, what is the presence of the U.S. and all the other powers in that country about? Why is the U.S. or why did the U.S. divided Africa into a military zone? Have we asked ourselves that question? There was a guy I couldn't stand, here without commenting. He had the picture of Putin. He tweeted the picture of Putin and saying, this guy is a warmonger, African countries. I mean, this was so foolish. I mean, this guy had no idea at all what he was talking about. No idea. I mean, you're entitled to your view. But I mean, if you're going to tweet something, and I saw he had, a number of followers. And it's like, what are you talking about? When is this mindset going to change? Yeah. So what are these countries doing there? Having talked about military coups, and I said I support it, and I've given a context as to why I will support a military coup, if our institutions will continue to facilitate the rigging of elections and protecting the incumbents, then of course the outcome of it will be a disgruntled people in which only the army can come and rescue the people. That's what it is. So instead of building infrastructures for the people to benefit, they built a drone base, 100 million drone base, to persecute what? What? Who? Where? Why should it be Niger? Why do they have 4 military bases, foreign bases in that country? And people are suffering. And if you check it, of course, it's usually the same. That's how the divide is. If there is a chance now for people to protest, for Bazoum, people who worked in those bases and those few places, this is the divide and rule tactic, in which Western interest is so obvious and they are paid well. But this is just a tiny number of the population. The vast majority are always in poverty. But if an opportunity was going to be given now, say, well, let people come out, here and protest for democracy, you will see the number of people who will turn out will be those people that are benefiting exactly from the system. But why do you have this great number of people who are poor? Again, as I was saying, the United States have gone on to carve the entire Africa into Africa come. So you've got like up there on the north. No, not on the north. Yeah, but of course the north has theirs. But then you have east, they've got theirs. So they've carved the whole parts of Africa into military zones. Imagine this. And this is taking away millions and millions and millions of dollars, which you could pump in and help build infrastructures, create opportunities, factories, invest, and etc., so people can benefit. But this is not the case. It's all about militarizing the continent, which is not of benefit to us. Little wonder why people are waking up. Now, let's look at something else I wanted to talk about. I mean, within the same, geopolitics moving. I was talking about this guy who tweeted with the Russian president's photo and talking about African countries. Listen, in my view, it is an opportunity. We've had opportunity with the West. They've been the colonial masters of us for decades on end. What have we benefited? What have we benefited other than just being brainwashed? The divide and rule which is working between us, that some will agree. So if I have a house here now in Europe, I'm not supposed to be critical. I've got my children going to school, and these are just basic amenities. I've got my children going to school, so I'm not supposed to be critical. I am working, labor. So they gave me the job, so therefore I'm not supposed to be critical. What a load of BS. Yeah? So in this protest, anti-French sentiment, we are seeing Russian flags all over the place. And these Russian flags, I don't believe the Russians have planted these flags in there. In my belief, I think that these people who are doing the protest, they are also upset with the French and the West in general for how they've been treated over the many decades, that they prefer an alternative. And that alternative, I'm sure they are not asking to be treated by that alternative the same way the other alia, inter alia, had treated them. But no, I'm so upset with you that you need to go, and this show of this flag is my resentment to you, that we could start a new beginning. And this is what the leadership is supposed to be watching. Now, having said this about coups as well in this part of the conversation, bear in mind that there is a possibility, as remote as it could be, but possibility that the leadership of these countries could exploit these sentiments that these people are expressing of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist sentiment to their advantage. There is a possibility. But I think it's the other way, especially in Burkina Faso, because I understand their army, what they stand for. Let's be honest about it. This is a land of upright men, incorruptible men. And their army is an ideological army. It's a politically inclined army. It's not like some other countries with their riff-raff armies. No, this one is politically inclined. So it's about anti-French sentiment. Geopolitics shifting, guess what happened? They've gone to the North Koreans. This is really getting interesting. They've gone to the North Koreans, and remember, the North Koreans have got capabilities. And sometimes when we talk about geopolitics and world powers, some of us really don't understand that the war in South Korea is a stalemate. I mean, in Korea, the thing that splits the two Koreas, South and North, is a stalemate, never really ended. There is something called an armistice there, never really ended. But the North has been isolated for all these decades and decades and decades. But they've managed to develop capabilities, weaponry, weapon system. I mean, they can shoot a rocket to space. And above all, they are among the big boys in terms of nuclear weapon. Now, if you have nuclear weapon, nobody don't just come and, and bomb you or threaten you just like they are coming today for you. No, because you're in that club of nuclear weapon holders. You are part of it. No country with nuclear weapon is easily threatened except you're willing to have mutual destruction of some kind. And this weapon is so dangerous that even the holders themselves are afraid, but they hold it as a deterrent for each other. So you don't bomb me, I don't bomb you. And the North Koreans, they do have it. This is how they've survived. And to survive, that's why they've been developing their capabilities, weapon-wise, all these years. And remember, they're not alone. The people who are suspect is facilitating this growth of developing modern weaponry are the Russians. The Russians must be in bed with the North Koreans to a point where probably the Chinese, even though the Chinese are friendly, with the North Koreans, but the Chinese may not even like that idea very much. But this is exactly what it is. The Russian defense minister recently went to Pyongyang. That's the capital city for North Korea. And just when the minister returned, we heard this pact between Burkina Faso, Mali, and North Korea. North Korea, as a matter of fact, I don't believe is going to send soldiers there to fight, but they're going to provide the Burkinabe army with logistics, with weaponry, modern weaponry. I'm sure if a fight broke out today, we're going to see some of this. I don't pray for that because it's going to be really bad on those countries. It's really going to be bad on those countries. But the thing that has protected them thus far is because of these connections. Remember, if it were only these countries, these powerful countries, even France alone, who is violating the airspace of these countries, and that's a violation of international law. A country, call it sovereign, they close their airspace, you've got no business flying over it. That's a violation. But this is the bullshit that we're talking about. But the reason why they haven't gone in there, because they pressure Tinubu from Nigeria, who is a godfather, of some sort, to apply the pressure and the threat, which for me ended shamefully. I mean, a big country like Nigeria, and we're talking about the Union of West African States, ECOWAS, and then you put out an ultimatum. You almost sound like the APC ultimatum of 72 hours, and then in the end, nothing happened. That if you don't give up power, you don't release this president, we're coming to bomb you, as if you're talking to boys. These guys have formed a pact with the North Koreans. So they're going to have modern weaponry in there. And modern weapons means that even if the French go into the air, they're going to take their aircrafts down. They're going to take their aircrafts down. Another possible group of fighters that are in there that change the dynamics, geopolitics shifting, just like we've named or titled this program, is the Wagner Group. They are shifting their attention to Africa. One of my friends called me the other day and asked, don't you think, Prince, that they are shifting the war in Ukraine? Because the war in Ukraine seems to be coming to an end. Because pretty soon, in my opinion, I said this many months ago, of course, it's lasted beyond how it's supposed to last. But I still do understand, unlike others. And the reason why I say I do understand, unlike others, they keep saying the same thing. The Russians said they will prosecute this war in a week. But did you know that the Americans thought so themselves? The British thought so themselves, but they decided that we're not going to allow this to happen. So hence then, the Russians have been fighting a group called NATO by proxy. Over 200 billion, with a B, capital B, spent on that war so far, given to Ukraine. 200 billion. Arms. Every time we keep hearing, oh, this is going to be the game changer. Stinger missiles. You remember the one that they started with? I've even forgotten the name. And then they went on, to HIMARS, and then they went on to the tanks, Challenger tanks, and Leopard tanks, and what have you. The Russians have bombed them all. They're all gone. Patriot missiles, gone. Now they are talking about F-16s. And the Russians have said if these airplanes, which I doubt if they will enter into the theater of war over Russia, because probably by the time they're ready to introduce them, the war will be over unconditionally. Because this is the point. That's why the war is going on again for another long period of time. Unconditionally. But the Russians have said that if these were to, because these F-16s, they've got all kind of capabilities. All kind of capabilities. They can send flares, they can attack here and there, and I understand that they can even carry tactical nuclear weapons. So the Russians are not going to sit down there and entertain that. And for many, many years, the Russians have been developing capability against American weapons because they've always seen themselves as one day they may have a fight. So when you develop something, the other develop the antidote. How do I counter the F-16s? How do I counter the HIMARS? How do I counter? And they're doing it in the theater of war. So every day, the Ukrainians are dying in their tens of thousands. The Americans don't have any more weapons left. They are now supplying the Ukrainians with cluster bombs, which are banned. And then to justify that, it almost sounds like the SLPP and APC conversation between party supporters. When you mention something which is happening now, which is wrong, the SLPP will mention something in defense of what is happening now as, what about 10 years ago? What about this? What about that? And I had a friend who say, you don't like for me to talk about the history. We've been talking about the history for quite a long time. I still entertain history. Of course, we need to reference. But what are you referencing? You're talking about too evil, and too evil doesn't make right. And furthermore, we're not talking about an incident. We're talking about something that the people have adjudicated upon already. They got upset with the party that was in power because they were not doing the right things. They voted them out of power. Having voted them out of power on the basis of a new direction as promised by those in government, then you start doing the same thing. And when those same things are highlighted and you say, okay, the others did it, how are we moving forward? What sort of crass argument is that? I still don't get it. And then they will act as if, well, you just want your argument to prevail. Because I'm talking sense. Two wrongs are not equal, they're not equal to a right. That's a fact. So the Americans are lack of weapons, back to the conversation. They're issuing cluster bombs to the Ukrainians. They are all over Europe because they have run out of 55 millimeter shells. The Russians are firing 60,000 shells a day, artillery shells a day. The Ukrainians can only manage to fire between 3,000 and 5,000, even less. So how is the force proportionate? How you think you're going to win against such force? And then people say, oh, this, that. Because the Russians haven't gone in there to carpet bomb like the others will do. Just bomb everything that moves. No, the Russians are not doing that because these are their Slav brothers and they live just next door. So they have to be careful. They've got capabilities. They can move on all the way to the Polish border. They can. But that's not what they want to do. This war should have been finished from the very earliest weeks of the war. By April, the war started in February, March, April. There was a draft plan. They went to Turkey. The British Prime Minister then, Boris Johnson, flew in there to Zelensky and said, no. Under no circumstances should you agree. We will support you to the end. And since then, this is what they've been going with. And then you've got people out there as well who don't believe that the war is a proxy war. What else do you want to see? What else do you want to hear? The American presidents have said this over and over, that their aim is to weaken the Russians. So supporting Ukraine to do that is what they're doing, which is referred to as a proxy war. Somebody else fighting and bleeding out for your own cause. Yes, I can support you with the money, and as long as I'm not the one dying. As long as I'm not. So the reason why Russian flags are there is because the Russian might, I'm talking about back to Niger, might offer something different. And this is where I agree that we need an alternative. We can work with every one of them. But now that there is an alternative, that might give us a little bit of more leverage to negotiate whatever we want to negotiate with, because we can say, no, we don't accept your terms and conditions. We do accept these terms and conditions, or can you do better? Because why? We've got a choice. This is where our leaders need to wise up now, because this could be an opportunity. Throughout our independence from the 1960s, there have been opportunities, but every time we were tricked We were tricked into believing something else. And as an emotional people, we always get caught up. But that's what happened. We're tricked. We got to believe, what they tell us, even though they've just tied us. You also got the Chinese. So you see, you got options there. I mean, none of these people are good, but it's always in their interest. But the Russians haven't occupied a piece of our land. They never did. They didn't put chains on us. Neither did the Chinese. What is hard for you to get here? So we're not saying that the others should equally go away. But for now, they need to stop doing what they're doing. In other words, the exploitation needs to stop. We need to come to the table and have a negotiation about what they want from us and what we want from them. We want a new security framework, a new financial framework. This is what we need as Africans. Not forcing us to open up our markets and then you dump everything that you want there on an industrial scale, killing us our small and medium-time businesses. That's what you've been doing. And as a consequence, we continue to get poorer because there's always this flight of capital. Money has to be converted back into, forex because it has to go out. And instead of getting better, we're getting poorer because of the same policies. And you know this. You initiated some of these policies back during the 1980s. I'm talking about the IMF, the Structural Adjustment Program, SAP, that got us exactly where we are, as poor as hell. And many don't understand where these problems are coming from. And we just kind of blame ourselves. You can blame the leadership, but it's because the leadership is in cahoot with these foreign powers, these imperialists. The imperialists are only interested in their interests. Give them what they want, they're fine. Look at John Magufuli, the late man from Tanzania. We can study the life and times of a man of that kind, and that will be helpful to us. It's going to be hard because, again, here is the thing. When you resist, for example, I don't want to, it's like to loan is, you have to forcibly, you take a loan. And imagine the idea behind this is, if you loan me, then I'm almost, what's the word? I'm subjected to you. I don't know whether I've used the right word. I'm a little bit tongue-tied here. Subjected to you, or have to listen. I can't have a voice of my own because you will be dictating the pace and the terms and the conditions. What I can do, what I cannot do, because again, I am not independent, but yet we say we are independent. Do you feel me? That's exactly what my point is. We need to bring this program to an end. So let me just touch on a few things on the same subject matter, but on a few things. Okay. So the French threatened the French former colonies, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. So what these countries have done, they've severed ties with France. It's like, really? We're not having this anymore? Yeah? How dare you threaten us? In fact, we are revoking the deals that we have. The French was giving the Burkinabe government $100 million aid every year. And mind you, this is their own money. This is their own money. But then they were taking from in there between 200 to 300 billion every year. Can you wrap this around your head? Quite exploitative, isn't it? So why, if people get upset and try to take their country back or ask for new arrangement, new financial architecture, why do other people have qualms with this? Why don't you see through this? That it's been almost an impossible relationship in which you just continue to be subservient as if it is normal. And the imperialists think that this, they became so arrogant. They were acting with immunity. It's like, it's like a God-given right that they could do what they're doing. They didn't really care. So as a consequence of all of this, these guys in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have scrapped ties with the French. They've scrapped deals that they signed, including military pact, because the French are now suspects. They are now suspects. But within the theater of this action in Niger, I just wanted to bring something quickly. The United States and the French. You see, whilst both of them have got bases in there, and the French are predominantly the colonial power, the Americans have been operating, but they are a bit quiet. What I'm beginning to think, is it possible that the Americans could screw up the French? Because I told you earlier on, they are friends, but they can have their differences. And we've seen these differences play out a few times in history. For example, when they were going to Iraq back in 2003, in 1991, 2003, the French were not keen on that invasion because their economic interest in in Iraq, was just too much. And furthermore, Saddam Hussein was talking about converting usage of the dollar. Instead of using the dollar, which was the universal currency, he preferred to trade with the euro. And imagine you are an oil-rich nation. So we are talking about billions, and you're talking about screwing the Americans. So you see, the French were happy because they were talking about using the euro, and French had a lot of economic interest in there. So they were not keen on the war. So they fell out. The French opposed, the late Jacques Chirac, he opposed the war. The Americans became so incensed that they decided to ban French fries. In fact, they renamed it. They say no longer French fries. They didn't ban it, but they changed the name. They call it freedom fries instead of French fries. Another thing that they did was the recent one. The French signed billions of dollars worth of nuclear deal to supply Australia with nuclear weapons. That deal was done and dusted. But then the Americans and the British came and screwed up the French, upturned the deal, a deal that had been signed by a fellow European power. They upturned the deal. They rewrote a new deal for Australia, and Australia pivoted towards the United States and Britain in terms of the deal and screwed the French. What I'm trying to say here, could it be possible that the same could happen in Niger? I mean, this is about their interest and how it plays out. So the French are under immense pressure, and they're asking them to go out. Take your base, take your people. The Americans are there and negotiating, although they are part of the problem, but they are playing a low profile. Could they swap places with the French? That's a good question for you to think about. Let's look at Burkina Faso again quickly. Yeah, let's look at Burkina Faso and this other country. We're saying that there is a pattern here when it comes to talking about restoring democracy that I talked about earlier. I'm recapping now. We're coming towards the end of the program. And I asked, which democracy are people referring to? Which democracy, actually? Now, did I mention earlier about the Human Development Index of these countries? Just see where they are at the very bottom. But yet you've got billions and billions of deals, taking place right there. So that's a possibility that these colonial countries will go the different way, and they've started already. They've encouraged, how do you call them? They've had conversation definitely with the Russians. Wagner is playing around there. In fact, Wagner is already in Mali, so it's not an easy thing. And then Burkina Faso has signed deals, military cooperation with the North Koreans. Geopolitics shifting. Okay. Now let's look at uranium quickly from the Niger perspective and the French. So the 5 military deals, first of all, I was talking about that they signed, it's no longer. They've scrapped them. And these deals have been in place for quite a long period of time, I believe since the 1970s. They've been there, the 1980s. Now they've been scrapped. That's how serious the situation is. The unequal power dynamic has really fueled the issue about dissent and anti-colonial and neo-colonial sentiment in that part of Africa. They have not, I'm talking about the imperialists, they have not given us chance, here for us to deal with our own situation. They've always dealt with our situations for us in an unequal relation in which it's been very, very exploitative. One thing I think that we should be focusing on is how to diversify our friendship. We should learn who, and I talked about this again, like I say, I'm concluding. We should learn from who we deem is worth learning from, not those that they choose for us, that we have to learn from these. No, we've got a sense of our own. I'm sure you will agree with me. We don't have to look at our priorities from a Western prism, from a context of the West. No, there are other civilizations as well. There are other powers as well. There's Russia, there's China, there's Malaysia, there's Australia, there's Singapore. These are all powerful countries where their own science base, their own civilization, their own culture, their own literature base. We could learn a lot from them. We could do exchanges with them. We could send students to them, here to go and learn. We could send people to the Koreans, North Korea. There's something that we can learn from them. But they brainwash us so much that all the others are evil. Only the others that we are supposed to align ourselves with are good. We need to have a rethink, Fumble. We need to have a rethink about that, okay? The raw materials that are taken from these countries that we named earlier, it goes to France. Uranium, for example, which goes to France in heavy quantity, is used to generate electricity. Do you also know something, ladies and gentlemen, that France, from the uranium that they get from Niger, they sell the same uranium abroad. Remember that the French, they've got energy companies abroad, including the UK where I am. Their energy company is called Arriva. They've brought franchises in the UK. They're operating here and other countries as well. So which means that they are selling electricity or energy to foreign countries. And this includes the UK, okay? Out of these sales, it makes billions and billions of dollars, while they use to provide, to run, to facilitate the extraction of more materials from Niger. They continue to get rich while the people of Niger continue to get poorer. Do you see the discord? Do you see it? Do you see the unevenness, the unbalance, and deliberate exploitation without, any empathy at all, which is what I was referring to as deliberately exploiting a people and the arrogance of these people and operating under a culture of impunity. And if you don't take matters into your own hands, then of course, there are no plans for it to change. Only now possibly that it can change. This is why instead of warring, they need to jaw. They need to have a conversation. Okay? You're making billions out of this, selling materials that you extract from this country, pay them a mere pittance, make billions. And then you credit them some of the same money. And doesn't only stop there, but with higher interest, frying John with John's own palm oil. That's what the French has been doing, colonial powers generally. This is wrong. So they either credit these countries. Another thing that they used to do or they continue to do, which again we need to try and stop, is they use the same proceed to give aid. So you see, creating a culture of being benevolent, of being benign. After you've raped their resources, plundered their resources, you take some of the profit, a meager sum, and then you send it to them as aid. And then you create jobs for your NGOs, your experts, so-called experts, those that go and teach us how to fix a water well. And then out of every pound or dollar or euro, they take 3/4 of it back out of the country and only 25% stays there. What sort of goodness is this? From that energy alone, France generates 3.3 billion a year. 3.3 billion. Can you imagine? So we also know, and I said this earlier, that there are many other resources. This is why they are going nowhere. This is why they keep inventing different things happening in the Sahel, which is create a security risk, in which then you have to look for protection, like I described it, mafia style. So you pay protection money. And in some cases, they offer to come, because you're former colonies, and then they sell weapons. They come, they bring instructors, not knowing that they are facilitating all this destabilization of the continent, in this case, the Sahel. But this is no more, because those that used to express sympathy for the looters, they are decreasing in number, only a hardened few. And these are the same people who benefit out of the system. But they are only few. And the voice of the many will always sort of prevail. Again, I did say that while I tried to lay emphasis on this, because I don't want to be misconstrued in latter times. That's why I'm being very careful. These records, they stay on forever and can be used against you. So once more, I reiterate, I'm not a supporter of coup. I believe in the democratic process. But there are things that precipitate coups. And this, one of the key most elements that does this or precipitate coups, is because of institutional violations, institutional coups. The institutions of state are not independent. Instead, they are used to the advantage in a dishonorable way, in an immoral way, in an illegal way, to fare the outcome for the incumbency. This in itself is cheating. This in itself is undemocratic. So another undemocratic means to fight an undemocratic means is what we are seeing, that in 3 years, we've witnessed the resurgence of coups in the continent. But having said that, if institutional coups were to be stopped, let's reform our institutions, let's make them powerful, let's make them strong, let's make them independent, then of course the institutions will not easily be manipulated to favor an outcome, most likely in behalf of an incumbent, but it will work for the people. And when that works for the people, we won't see coups because the people will rebel against coups. It won't even be necessary, because if it does happen, you will see the outright greed and misinformation on the part of the coup plotters, that whatever they say is not going to be accepted by the people, and the people are going to run these people out of town. As we speak, the French is not going to take this line down. They are now making contingency plans for the expected shortfall. Not going to take this line down in two ways. One, they're going to try and instigate some kind of interference. They can't do it directly, because that will be a total aggression that will be condemned even by their partners in crime, because it will be too obvious. But they are slick enough to know this, so they will always manipulate and find ways indirectly through proxy or different kinds, because remember, they've got many, many tools in their kit box to disturb the progress, to upturn the balance. It will be resisted, but it will come at a cost. But it won't be by them directly. That's why we saw ECOWAS became so lively, that Tinubu, who was not elected democratically, whose matter is still in the courts, you probably could say he's panicking. And probably, not even probably, the likelihood for other ECOWAS leaders who are not being fair to the people to see similar things that visited Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso will visit them. It will visit them. Chad, it will visit them. Because why? They are not being democratic. They are only doing the bidding of the masters. And now that the people are becoming over-conscious, that no, something is not right. And what is not right is we have been misled, misruled by these people who are serving as proxies to keep us down while the loot is going out and we are not developing. So France is not going to take this line down, and she's going to try to engineer something. As we speak, I hear that they keep violating the airspace of these countries, but it won't be for long because one of their aircrafts is going to be shot down soon. Did I say that the Burkinabes and the Malians have gone and signed a pact with North Korea? So they might be having sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons soon that will teach the French some kind of a lesson that you can't just violate our airspace, and these countries will be in the right legal position for actions of that kind. So another thing that I was trying to say is they try to downplay the loss in Niger. But no, this is not true, that we're only getting 20%. They've scaled down because in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, the level of this uranium and other extracts that they were getting from these countries had been reduced because they had diversified the extraction or the supplying countries. So it's only about 20% now, whereas in the 60s it was 75%, 60%. Now it's only about 20%. But it's not only uranium. You're extracting so many other minerals. And with the prospect of oil, can you imagine? Now you're going to miss out on that. And you think you're going to take it lying down? No. But the idea, again, is Niger continue to remain the fifth largest supplier to France. Imagine in the entire world, Niger is the fifth largest supplier to France of uranium. Okay, so whether that number has gone down from the 60s, 70s, and 80s is still significant because there's going to be a chunk of it that's going to cause some problems. For now, even the EU are saying that they've got enough reserve. You see, they're clever, but of course, it makes absolute sense that you're going to always have reserve for 3 months, 6 months, just in case there are emergencies, so that it does not have an immediate impact on the system, on the country. Like, for example, if what you only had was what you depended on, and Ukraine was to, Niger was to pull the plug, then obvious that France will be encountering blackout. Can you imagine something unknown of? Because she is energy independent, energy efficient, and etc., etc. But they've got reserves. So before those reserves expire, some deals have to be done, or they have to look elsewhere to make up for the 20% or more that they will have lost or be losing from Niger. Okay. But this also means that there are reduced profits, because remember earlier on in the broadcast, I also said that economics is involved. You were getting uranium for the cheapest in Niger, because why? You got no regard for them. And you negotiated a deal with a corrupt Bazoum, in which the entire deal was shrouded in secrecy, kept in secrecy. As we speak, it's now that those secrecy is being unraveled. So now you hear that they're going to try the leader for high treason, the former leader, Bazoum, Mohamed Bazoum, for high treason. These are some of the things I'm sure going to be on the charge sheet. Okay? So now you're not going to be getting it for that cheap. If you are going to be getting it for more expensive than you used to, which means that there's going to be a problem either in terms of your windfall, your profit is going to be affected. And in this case, significantly, because you were getting it so cheap. The same goes to the EU, because the EU is there. They are there too, extracting, making profit out of the Nigerian people. Okay. Now they have to go and look for new market, which is going to cost them even more. What we are asking the French to do, what we are asking these imperialist powers to do, is to do away with the arrogance of impunity, how they have been operating with us, and instead embrace equal partnership. Equal partnership is the thing that will take us, kind of forward. Is the thing that will make us look like human beings, like decent human beings. You're extracting these materials from us. What is wrong with you giving us our fair share of the extract? Okay. Now, I was saying countries that we need to look up to. I didn't even mention the countries in the Middle East as well, because it's not only the Malaysians, the Singapores, and the Australians, and you name it, but also in the Middle East, the Qataris, the Kuwaitis. We could look at them. They too have got advantages of their own that we can learn from. We also have to know that many a times because sometimes some of our compatriots blame us as if we have never tried. Again, this was mentioned earlier, that we did put up resistance. It's not everything that we took lying down. No, we resisted heavily. The continent has always tried in many ways to define ourselves, the direction that we want to go. But always this direction was hampered by the same imperialist power. And the only reason, the person who benefits from the hampering of this relationship is the West. Because when we discover who we are and how we want to go forward with our countries in respect of our people, then it is not to their benefit, and they will always use means available to them, both covert and overt, both unaccepted means, orthodox, unorthodox means, to stop us in our track. When we started gaining independence in the 1960s, we were so excited. Remember Kwame Osajifo Nkrumah, Amanda Rivell, because he saw the continent long before a lot of other people, including Europeans, whose formula the European Union is said to have used. Okay? He said, when do we want our independence? Now. And that Africa will never really be free until the entire continent is free. He was absolutely right, because what they did in the Berlin Conference of the 1880s, they carved us out and shared us as if we were their properties. They made us to be vassal states, to be client states of theirs. Not even client state. Client state is so disgusting. Spare me 1 minute. Again, once more, sorry for that interruption, but we need for end this program. So we've tried many a times to define our destiny. Like I said from the beginning of this program, every nation, every people or peoples are entitled to self-determination. It's crafted in international law, and we need to understand this. But every time we try, because it's not in the interest of many whose business is to extract our minerals, deprive us of the gains and the profit, so they always disturb the peace, and sometimes in a violent way. They've killed our leaders many a times, and if you check the leaders that died, it's simply because they stood up to a people who never wanted us to progress, who wanted us to just be subservient, to look up to them as if they are the beginning and the end. And this is not the case. They killed Kwame Osajifo Nkrumah, the late Amilcar Cabral. They started off with Patrice Emile Lumumba, Walter Sisulu, Steve Biko, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, Thomas Sankara, and so many others before them. So many others before them. If you check it, this is all a pattern. Whenever we want to stand up on our own, they wouldn't allow that to happen, because after all, we are not supposed to be a civilized people. We are not supposed to be an intelligent people. We're not supposed to understand all the mechanics of all these things. Neither should we understand what is given to us, which has become our greatest enemy, for which our enemies come and disturb us. For which our enemies come and disturb us. Yeah. Please take it to the office when I come. I'll sign it. Yeah. For which the enemies come and disturb us. Okay. So like I was saying, I've got to go, but just before I leave, I'm just wrapping up. Okay. Our interest should supersede everything else. Our interest should supersede everything else. And I want to leave the audience with these wise words. You know, when we went to school, this is years back, we had brilliant literatures that we were reading. I'm not talking about the foreign ones. The foreign ones were equally important, but the design again was to, restructure, re-engineer our brain to fit in with others so that they can easily just just take us over, usurp our ability to be independent, to be ourselves. But against that backdrop, we also had beautiful authors, beautiful books, such as Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart, one of the greatest books ever. We had authors such as Cyprian Ekwensi and so many others. But one that left a mark in my mind or on my mind is that of the Kenyan Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I'm sure a lot of us watching or who will watch later will have read this. And if you haven't, it's a brilliant piece of literature. It goes back decades, but it's still necessary today, which I want to leave with you these wise words from Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He said, that's from the book, The River Between. Go unto him, learn what he likes, laugh if possible, but learn what you can. But what you need to do after you've learned what you can is to bring it home. Bring it home to us so that we can utilize it. Customize it for the benefit of our people. Remember that this was a civilized country, for like decades. By the turn of the century, they were wearing silk, eating in porcelain, in China. Yeah. But again, like I said, the program needs to end. And on the basis of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, I just repeat quickly again, go unto him, learn what he likes. After you've learned what he likes, take it, bring it home, customize it, and do so for the benefit of our people. Ladies and gentlemen, I beg to leave you on that note. Don't forget, on Sunday, the publicity secretary of the All People's Congress, CDIR Tunis, will be on the program. And we're going to be questioning him because even myself will be asking the question, want to know what's the position of the APC? Are they going to remain resolute with their demands, or are they going to compromise? Are we beginning to see what are cracks on the wall already? There are many things we're going to be asking. So keep tuned. Don't forget, it will be on Sunday, 10 o'clock UK time, 9 p.m. Salon time, 5 p.m. Eastern time. But for everyone else, Africa must rise up. Africa cannot remain the same. On this note, I beg to leave. Until then, if you like this broadcast, please like. Goodbye for now.